Welcome back to Against the Cage, your home for all things MMA, including exclusive interviews with all your favorite fighters and figures in the sport. My name is Jake Arrier. I'm joined here by my co-hosts Scott Fontana and Erich Richter. And guys, a lot has happened since the last time that we spoke in the world of MMA, but let's start with Israel Adesanya. He sustained his fourth loss in a row at the hands of Joe Pyfer via TKO on Saturday night at UFC Seattle. After the fight, Izzy did signal that he's not going anywhere, but with this losing streak getting even longer, a lot of fighters, fans, media, everyone has kind of been talking about whether or not it's time for Izzy to hang up the gloves, and this has continued to be an ongoing conversation. So, Scott, I want to ask you, when is it time for us to have questions about fighters like Izzy to retire?
So I kind of try to stick to one particular way where I really start to get vocal about, okay, I'd like to see this person maybe stop fighting, right? And that really has much more to do with fighter well-being. Like I should probably preface by saying anytime we start talking about wanting a fighter to retire, whether they should retire or not, we're being selfish, right? Because that's just the truth. We are really looking for that fighter to kind of do what we want them to do. And we're trying to say, hey, you should do it this way, rather than allowing them the agency to do that, right? And sometimes when it is health related, yeah, you're really concerned. Maybe they're not making the smartest choice. They're being a little too selfish for themselves. But I don't know that that's what we have here. We've seen it with like Frankie Edgar near the end. I really wanted him to retire. He was taking way too many hits. He had a long career taking hits, and I just didn't want to see that anymore. Chuck Liddell, same deal. I think he needed to go, and I think he made the right choice stepping away and the wrong choice stepping back in for one more time against Tito Ortiz many years later. Here, I just don't see it with Izzy. I don't know if you guys do, but I don't.
Erich, I'm curious I've got some as well, but I want to hear what you got to say.
Yeah, same similar thought process as you, Scott. It's not like Adesanya got in there and got starched by Joe Pyfer. He did take some hits, but he was kind of still able to bob and weave and use some of his athleticism. I was watching the fight next to some of the other media members at the RAF event here in Tampa, Florida. Look, Israel Adesanya, and I think a big piece of this is like, does he have a plan? Is he just going to go out there and continue fighting for the UFC, or is there a bigger plan here? And I believe that there is. And you might have noticed recently that Alex Pereira signed an 8-fight contract, which is basically a lifetime deal with the UFC. He will not be leaving the promotion really for any reason. At least it doesn't look like it. I think that Israel Adesanya's contract is probably coming up here. I don't know how many fights left are on the deal, but the landscape of MMA is totally different now. We saw, and Joe Rogan was talking about this with some of the other MMA people, Brendan Schaub, et cetera, on the Fight Companion for UFC London. They had heard that Nate Diaz got 10 to 15 million to fight on the MVP card. I have no idea if MVP is going to stick around, but I would venture to guess Israel Adesanya is going to have a lot of options if he becomes a free agent at any point. He might have 1 or 2 fights left on his deal. At which point it would make tons of sense for him to go and maybe go be a free agent and see if there's a kickboxing match with Jake Paul out there or something like that where he can make big money, maybe $10 million to fight whomever. I think that is kind of why Israel Adesanya was, like, I'm not going anywhere, because I think that there's a bigger plan at stake here.
Look, you're right there. Like, realistically, he's probably making good money. I think he was very happy with his contract when he'd signed it years ago. So if he's still got fights left on it and he's not chinny, which I don't think he is, he should absolutely fight that contract out and make whatever money he can, because he doesn't look like somebody who's toast, right? Like, you want to say he's washed. That's the word that you sometimes see thrown around.
Yeah.
I don't know that he's washed in the sense of like, well, he's just done as a fighter. He is done as a championship level fighter. I think we understand that. He's very much been exposed for his lack of grappling. His grappling has always been kind of substandard for MMA, but he had decent enough takedown defense to kind of not let us see it very often, except for larger opponents. And he can't really do that anymore. I think he's been very exposed. It's going to be much harder against some of these other guys who can can grapple a little bit more. And as long as he can get matched up right, he can win fights, he can make money, and he can do exactly what you're saying, Erich. He can go on if he doesn't, if the UFC and Adesanya, they're both out of each other's business. he can make money doing other stuff. He could take a boxing match and probably make good money. Maybe he boxes Jake Paul for all we know and makes a ton of money. So, like, what are we telling this guy? Hey, you should stop fighting. Like, he's got a lot of money left to make. Let him do it.
100%. I think what you said initially, Scott, is it's honestly like, selfish in terms of when fans are calling for fighters to retire, and I fully agree with what you were saying in terms of when it is right to do that is when they're taking a lot of damage, and it's kind of like worrying. Like Tony Ferguson is a good example. Like getting finished viciously, there's not. It's not good for you, right? In Izzy, that's
Tony fell off a bit of a cliff too. Yeah.
Yeah. I think.
But look at what Tony's doing now. Tony as well, boxing. He's doing other stuff, and I don't know how much he's getting paid. And I don't want to speculate on what Israel Adesanya's financial situation is, but there are 8-figure fights out there for him. If he was a free agent right now, he'd probably be fighting on the MVP card.
I agree. I agree with you, especially to the points that you guys have been making. It's like there is no sign yet that he like has lost his touch in MMA. Just like from his performances, he's still able to put on good performances. He won that first round against Joe Pyfer, like I was talking about last week. Even in these fights that he's
and it was like I said to you, Jake. Like he keeps winning rounds. Like he's won the majority of rounds, and that continued here in his during this 1-in-5 stretch that he's on. He's still winning fights, and it's not because he's point fighting. He is winning fights. He's certainly making key mistakes, and I think you guys can both agree strategically. Very terrible decision for him to just kind of keep engaging in firefights with someone who hits as hard as Joe Pyfer does. Joe Pyfer's not a real striker in that sense, but he hits hard. Why would you tempt the fate there? Drag it out, let go deeper, and then, hey, maybe Pyfer doesn't have as much gas, and then you can start pouring that on, and you can put on that really impressive finish you want. But if he's also just trying to test himself here, then also he's getting what he wants out of his fight career, and he's not paying a gigantic price for it that we see yet. So, yeah, why not?
100%. I think a lot of the calls from fans you mentioned beforehand, like I think his hopes of becoming the champion or getting back to that, get challenging for a title again are pretty much gone at this point. And I think that's kind of what fans cling on to when they call for a fighter like Izzy to retire when that title picture is gone, is they're kind of obsessed with the legacy. There's nothing left for him to do as far as that resume, right? Like he could go on to make money and all that, but there's not another name that's going to really, add anything to it that he hasn't already done. But at the same point, it's exactly what you were saying. It's not really for us to make those decisions. It's his resume. He gets to do what he that he wants to it. So the career highlight of his career highlight is that knockout against Alex Pereira, which is also the last fight that he won. And not for nothing, Israel Adesanya has fought 100 times in kickboxing. Like he has fought for a long time. I don't know if did you guys ever watch the documentary that he put out? Israel Adesanya. I went to the premiere in Tribeca, New York, like 3 years ago. And it didn't get picked up by Netflix. I know that they were hoping that it would. It didn't. But his life is pretty interesting. He has been fighting his entire life, and the documentary is basically a therapy session between him and his therapist. He really dives in deep. You learn a lot about the guy. I don't know what platform it's on, but if you find it, watch it. There is a lot of meat on the bone for him still left out there. I just don't think it's going to end up being in the UFC. I think that eventually he's going to fight, do the super fights. Anderson Silva got a ton of money to fight Jake Paul. I just get out there, go be a free agent. I think that that's the future for him. He'll eventually be a free agent, maybe in like a year or two. Definitely. And
like he does not have anything left to prove. We understand that. I think if his story was a literal book, we are at the epilogue now. I think we've closed the chapter. I think, like you said, I think that probably the ending of that book, Eric, is probably the victory over Pereira, where he finally slays the dragon that had beaten him 3 times across 2 sports. Right? Like that's if the story of Adesanya's life is anything, it's probably leading up to that moment. Everything that happens after that, it just happens, and that's okay. If he can make a ton of money doing it, he really should. And like you kind of at least take seriously when somebody like a Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson starts saying like you've got nothing left to prove. Why are you still fighting? Like that at least carries a little bit of weight because he's walked in those shoes, right? But also it's a very different thing Mighty Mouse did not have the lucrative financial opportunities that are going to be and probably still are even under this contract available to Israel Adesanya. So he has every license to keep going. And who cares what his legacy ends up being? Do you think it's really going to be tainted all that badly by him fighting longer and maybe losing more fights? We saw Anderson Silva, you mentioned it. He did that. BJ Penn lost like his last like 8 or 10 fights or had draws in them. He lost almost every single thing. His legacy is damaged in a different way. And that is something else, right? But we still like at least anyone who watched him, right? Like I was there for BJ's, around his peak. I saw him as the lightweight champion. I understand that his legacy is going up and beating guys at weight and challenging himself at all these crazy weight classes and fighting in a different way in a different era. And it doesn't matter that he lost all those fights. It probably doesn't even matter what's happening to him in his personal life that seems to be a total mess. He's still a legend in this sport, and so is Adesanya.
Yeah, I can't see a time where people won't think of Israel Adesanya and think one of the best middleweights of all time, because he is. Like I mean, he did go on to defeat Alex Pereira, but if he won that 5th round in that final fight, there was nothing else for him to do at that division. Essentially, Pereira was really the last thing for him to do.
That was
and
it.
It ended up being a great couple of fights in the UFC. And you can't take any of that away from him. So it's still there.
From a striking perspective, he has plenty of options. He's got options on options on options. He'll be fine.
Yeah, and
I'll tell you what. I'll be honest with you guys. Like I think it's hard to figure out what you do with him next, right? I think there's still entertainment fights you can make with him. Don't put him against anyone who can wrestle. Frankly, why would you do it unless you're just trying to damage his value, which doesn't make any sense. You put him in fun fights, and honestly, if whether he wins or loses his next fight, or even what happens next month, if Chimaev goes out there and he beats Sean Strickland, what do you do with Sean Strickland? Why don't you just do Strickland against Adesanya? Why not? Yeah, that's an interesting fight. People would watch it. I think people would definitely tune in for that. And no one's going to sit there and say, "Oh man, what if Strickland just destroys him and knocks him out?" Like that's not really Strickland's game. He had a really impressive performance against Adesanya in their title fight, but there's nothing that suggests that Strickland would go out there and just wreck him in like a dangerous way. So why not put that fight together again? I think you can do things with him that are intriguing.
Yeah. I was thinking that or Caio Borralho. One of those two. Strikers.
I'm okay with that too. Yeah. I think you can do so much with him. And if you get somebody like Borralho against him and Borralho goes out there and wins, there's one more name that you're going to get built a little bit more off of Adesanya. And that is how the fight game does work, right? The young eat the old. It is what it is. It's a tale as old as time unless you leave early like Habib, right? He's the exception. Everybody's gonna go through this. I don't know. I'm cool with him soldiering. I love his approach. Like he's not effing leaving. He was totally on board with that. He had no qualms about it. He wants to go, and I loved his sportsmanship too. He was really all about giving the moment to Joe Pyfer, like an athlete of his stature, and honestly his ego. He does have an ego. Anyone could have just said he could just be sour grapes, or he could have just left the cage and not stuck around. But he gave all the props. He took a picture with him. I loved it. There was great martial arts spirit there, and I was really on board with that.
Absolutely. I think that's unless we have anything more to say about Izzy, I think that's a good transition into the guy who's standing at the other end of the octagon, Mr. Joe Pyfer. And obviously, we laid it out. Izzy is on a little bit of a skid streak here, and while he's not in our rankings because of these stipulations that we have attached to it, I got to throw it to you, Erich. Joe Pyfer, do you think he's in the middleweight elite now with a win over Izzy?
Not really. Just to be totally transparent, this was a solid win for him. No, nothing to take away. He did lose the first round, and look at the Newark card that we went to. I remember when Dvalishvili fought Sean O'Malley. I said that Joe Pyfer had the look of the star. Like he wears the suit. He's got the look. He could talk a little bit, which I like. But then he fights Kelvin Gastelum, who really shouldn't even be fighting. And he lost the third round in that fight. And look, he had two knockdowns in that fight, but he lost the third round, and he has the loss to Jack Hermanson in an extended fight. So, do I think he's in the middleweight? It's not like I'm going to be clamoring for a title shot from him anytime soon. There's just many fighters ahead of him. Nasruddin Imavov and even Dricus du Plessis. He's going to need maybe two more fights, and they'd have to be really, really style driven, finishes here. Joe Pyfer, I think, is solid. I really just want him, and even like as I was watching the fight, at the RAF event, I was like, he looks tired already in the second round. Like, I still have major questions about his gas tank, and I don't think his wrestling is anything to write home about. Now, to be fair, I mean, they did move him up 8 spots in the rankings. He went, he's all the way up at was it number 6 now? So he's in a spot where it's like,
The
maybe
UFC
he
rankings
could.
are what they are, right? We have our own. That's why we like to do it a better way,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Stay
I'm
tuned.
never gonna have Joe Pyfer at that high. Like, that's just not happening.
Unless he has anything to
I'll
say
have
about
honest.
it.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll be making our own rankings, but and there's other middleweights in the PFL that'll probably have ranked higher than Joe Pyfer. So, yeah, I mean, all things considered, it's not like I'm clamoring for a title shot from him. I thought it was an okay performance, and he did what he did.
Scott, where's your head at?
Look, I will say that I do agree with Eric that he is not quite in there. I think he's really right at the doorstep. I think he kind of almost rang that proverbial doorbell, right? He just needs to fight one more guy, and then he at least is in that group, right? He's not going to get the title shot next either, but yeah, go out there. But you never know, too. I won't even rule that out because he is a popular guy. Obviously, Dana White likes him. That carries some weight when it comes to getting those title shots. So if he goes out there and he knocks out the right guy in his next fight and he looks good, there's no reason they wouldn't put him in a title fight. I don't see any reason why not. I will also say though, I don't want to just to push back a little bit on you, Eric, as far as some of these other fights, right? Yes, he didn't do as well in that third round against Kelvin Gastelum, but he did the work beforehand. I think we saw at least all you need to do is win 2 rounds, and he did. So that's all that matters. He's not absolutely a home wrecker, right? He's not going to destroy everything. He's not there yet. And that Hermanson loss, I think that was more like, okay, let's see where he's at. He wasn't there. He was 27 years old. Life starts at almost 30 for most of these fighters. He needed a little more seasoning. That showed. I think he's starting to head that way. So that's why I do think he actually is at the doorstep of the elite at middleweight.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fair.
for me, it was he did his job. He won the fight, right? But just because of how the fight went, a lot of my questions weren't necessarily answered. Like, is he getting taken down and grounded and pounded, and kind of just seeing the way that Izzy was operating in that scenario is like, I'm not loving how you're protecting yourself here, not getting out of this situation. It just didn't tell me as much as I would have liked. Izzy was winning he won the first round. He's winning some of those striking exchanges. So Joe didn't do anything wrong, and I think he's certainly on the doorstep, like you said, Scott, with a win over Israel. But I would have liked to learn a little bit more in that
Just
fight, if
to
that makes sense.
just to put a button on and be super clear, this is the only win that he has inside from anyone that's in the top 15. If you look at just like who he's fought, there's just not enough. There's not enough competition there. I think the fight to make next would be Reiner de Ritter versus Joe Pyfer. Sign up. That could be.
I think RDR is going up though, Eric. I don't think RDR is sticking around 85.
Okay. All right. Well, regardless, I think that, there's just not enough level of competition for him. I mean, he's got like Abus Magomedov, fight in there. Like, there's just Marc-Andre Burial. Like, there's just not a whole lot there to really size him up against.
Scott, it looked like you had a thought, though.
I would. I do agree with you on that, Eric. The only thing I would say, though, is I think we did learn something about Joe Pyfer, and it was that he at least can make the smart decision in a fight when presented with an opportunity not to, right? Like, he didn't have to get the fight down to the floor. He could have kept being like, all right, I just want to see if I can knock out Israel Adesanya. There could be ego there. And it wasn't working for him. He did adjust. We have seen a lot of young, talented fighters not make that adjustment. And I think the fact that he did, that does show that at least there's some discipline there. He was a smarter fighter in the cage than Israel Adesanya, the former 2-time champion of the division. So that says something to me.
That's okay. That is very, very fair. I'll give you that one.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to put a bow on that one, guys. In our co-main event, we had a unbelievable finish from Alexa
Yeah.
Grasso on Macy Barber. Uh, it was ruled as a knockout. However, she absolutely, like an anaconda, just cinched a rear naked choke into what seemed like Macy Barber's already unconscious body. Very scary scenes afterwards. What felt like quite a few minutes on end. Maybe it perhaps was. She was just laying on the ground, eyes open. Scary scenes. Luckily, Macy gets up and she's okay eventually. But Erich, I gotta ask you, because your box office, and this was just an emphatic finish that is going to be in highlight reels for a very long time. Alexa Grasso, she was on a little bit of a skid beforehand. She comes away with this emphatic finish. Does this finish erase any disappointments that she's had since that initial win over Valentina Shevchenko? What do you think?
It certainly does. Honestly, if you look at her resume and like the two finishes that she has, obviously that are her last two wins, she's 2-3 in her last five. You look at the two finishes that she has, her resume is way more interesting than a lot of other women's fighters, including, I mean, obviously different weight class, but including two fighters who are fighting this weekend, Verna Jandiroba and Tabitha Ricci. And Verna Jandiroba also just fought for a title. Alexa Grasso's got two highlights that are way better than anything that Jandiroba's really done, in my opinion, at least. I mean, the submission win over Valentina Shevchenko was mind blowing in its own right. This win over Macy Barber, that might be the nastiest finish that we've seen in women's MMA as a whole. I mean, when you like bring them all
It's the
up, it's like
knockout of the year
oh,
front runner right now. That's what it is.
100%, 100% it is. We were going nuts at the RAF event as it was unfolding. It was crazy. So Barber, comes in here as a favorite, and Alexa Grasso just starches her. I mean, unbelievable scenes here for Alexa Grasso. Look, she's training in was it in Mexico with Diego Lopez. She's Look, those two highlights, no one can take those away from her. I don't know what the rest of her outlook looks at the division, but you can't tell me that any. I look at her totally different now. This changed her career. It really did.
Yeah, I mean, right when it seemed like she was kind of all but certainly out of that title picture, the UFC loves violence. I can't help but think that she's not as far as we may have previously thought. Scott, what do you think, though?
I It really made me wonder, where was this against Natalia Silva when they fought? Like that fight looks more and more like a blip now that we have this, right? Because it was coming off of obviously the third fight against Valentina Shevchenko. It wasn't particularly competitive, but the one before it was a draw. Realistically, probably should have just gone to Shevchenko, but competitive nonetheless. And the first one, obviously, she won. This one was such a far cry from what happened against Natalia Silva that you really do. I just can't understand what happened there. Obviously, just something wasn't right that night, or maybe it was just the matchup. I don't know. Also, I mean, look, gotta at least account for the fact that Macy Barber obviously has not evolved as a striker too. There were opportunities that she was able to go back to the well a few times to make this happen, right? So there is that. But Grasso, she's absolutely back in there. I think we were starting to wonder as she kind of had peaked, and obviously if you peak as the champion. That's kind of all the peak really can be, other than being a better champion. But she definitely looks like she's right back in the mix now. You almost think maybe I wouldn't rank Grasso ahead of Natalia Silva. I think that fight happens, and I think you have to account for that it happened the way it did, especially. But in terms of the UFC and how they determine who gets these title shots, I don't know where Natalia Silva sat relative to Erin Blanchfield. Those were kind of the two front runners, but I'm going to say it's very easy for them to look at those two, add Alexa Grasso in the mix, and say, well, yeah, we'd rather give it to Alexa Grasso now than Natalia
Right.
Silva.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and Grasso's, like, as far as the division goes, I would say she in name value. I mean, being a former champion gives you a lot of name value, right? And on top
Wins
of
like
that,
this.
Very, very recognizable in Mexico. Yes, all of that.
yeah, Erich.
Still
And
think
then just
Blanchfield really should have the inside track, right? I think we all agree there.
100%. 100%. Yeah, that better happen next. But I will say, and as resident box office guy here, this win is worth more than just a regular win. This is worth like 1.5 or 2 wins because it's the highlight reel. It's the stuff that they're going to be able to put on promos. This is worth more. It just is.
Absolutely.
This is going in the Baba O'Reilly reel. We're going to see this before fights in the arenas now. This is going to be in there for a very
Absolutely.
long time.
I think
100%. This is worth its weight in gold, honestly.
I just I can't, before she hit the ground, her arm was around
Yeah.
her neck. Like
It
that's
was
Already
unbelievable.
choking her. Yeah. Man, oh
unbelievable.
man, that was wild. I couldn't believe it. My jaw was on the floor.
Yeah, my brother was like in the bathroom and I was watching and he just hears me scream. He's like, "What happened? Like, did someone break in?" I was like, "No, it's even better." Let's talk about let's talk
It's
about
even better than that.
no.
Amazing.
Let's talk about Macy Barber, guys. And Scott, I want to ask you this. Sometimes we talk about fighters who make it into the top 10 and they just can't quite crack the top. For Macy, do you think that she's peaked from what we saw in this fight? What do you think?
In some ways, I think so. Like I just said before, she's not really evolving. I think she kind of hits hard enough for that weight class that at least there's a little bit of a difference maker there, but she's not like as good at striking as some of these other women she's got to deal with. I mean, is she better than Alexa Grasso? I think we now know absolutely not. Is she better than Manon Fiorot? No. Is she better than Valentina Shevchenko? No. There's a lot of people that are going to be able to handle essentially Macy's best attribute. There's another in Erin Blanchfield who very easily could have just tortured her on the ground had that fight happened, had Macy Barber been able to make the walk, didn't have that medical episode last year that, scratched that fight right before it happened. I just don't look at the landscape of this division, and even as young as Macy Barber is, I just don't see her ascending distinctly higher. I will say she realistically could still get. She just won 7 fights in a row. This was the end of a 7 fight win streak, sandwiched between 2 losses to Alexa Grasso, former champion. So maybe she could be as good as the second or third best and even challenge for the belt. But she is not a champion. She doesn't look like a champion. She doesn't act like a champion. I don't see that for her. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to call it right now.
Okay, fair enough. Before I give my thoughts, Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's harsh, but it's fair, Scott. For me, Macy Barber came in here looking like she was going to be like one of the next big things, and they definitely tabbed her as that when she was coming up. If anyone remembers, many many years ago, she came in at a very young age. Now she finds herself after a really bad loss. For me, I think that she could still keep getting better, and like you said, maybe jump in and like she has some wins over Amanda Lemos. Like there are some good wins in there, and I actually think very highly of Lemos, but. For Barber,
I mean,
I'm
Lemos is
worried
a
about
115er though.
yeah, totally fair. My
Yeah.
issue with Barber is, it's the damage with the health concerns. We've seen her pull out of events the night of, as she's about to make a walk, issues with weight. I got a lot of concerns there. I think she just needs to decide what she wants to do. Is this going to be what she wants for the rest of her life? Because as you said, I'm not so sure that there's a clear path to a title shot. I'm just not.
Eric, I think you might have been talking about Amanda Hebos. I'm just looking at
Oh,
her
Amanda Hebos. Sorry about that.
at
Amanda
her resume.
Hebos.
No, but that's
Yeah.
another thing that I definitely I wanted to touch on. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what's going on. What was going on behind the scenes in that Erin Blanchfield fight,
Yeah.
and then obviously this did not give me a whole lot of peace of mind as far as her health and safety. But one thing that I will say is, and you mentioned this, Scott, she is very young and she was on a very long win streak beforehand. So I'm not totally writing her off. I know you were calling your shot there a little bit, saying that you're pretty convinced that this is
A lot
probably
bit.
yeah. I definitely see your argument as far as if this is how she looks against the top contenders at the moment, it's not looking great, but there's a lot of time left, I would say. At the age of 27, who knows? Although this is a pretty tough one to come back from.
And the tricky thing is there's actually some younger women in this weight class who are already kind of there. So it's not even like she can wait out the old guard to just go away.
Mhm.
There's going to be, again, Erin Blanchfield's going to be there. Natalia Silva is not old. There's women who are going to be around. There's going to be women who will come in probably from other different combat sports that they can bring some incredible skills to the table too. And I don't. What is Macy Barber other than like the hype behind her came from her. She was very boastful. She was braggadocious. That's where it all comes from. It's not necessarily because, man, she has this all-world skill set. She was finishing women and she was boastful. And she's backed it up with a lot of results, but I think she's hit a wall. That's where we are.
Fair enough. Well, guys, let us know in the comments what what your biggest takeaways were from UFC Seattle. Do you think that we're right about Israel Adesanya doing whatever the hell he wants to do, or do you think that he should retire? Let us know about everything that we talked about down below. But guys, let's also talk about what happened the past 2 weeks in PFL, because they've had quite a lot going on in middleweight at 185 over there, starting in Madrid 2 weekends ago rather. Johnny Eblen, Costello Vanstinas defeating Fabian Edwards. And then this past weekend, we had Johnny Eblen defeating Brian Battle. A lot of fights to go over, right? And then also we had Dalton Rasta with his win over Impa Kasanganay. Let's start with Johnny.
No. Other way around.
Sorry.
Kasanganay.
Okay. Yes, you're right. Sorry. Oh my gosh. There was
you got it on a roll there, Jake. That's all right.
Call an ambulance, but not for me moment. I had it mixed up in my head. Scott, I'll ask you, Johnny Eblen, do you think that this loss to Costello Vanstinas unlocked something in him? Because it looked like right from the get-go, he was looking to get him out of there and get home, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you think?
Dude, he was stewing about that, obviously. I mean, when I spoke to him, you could tell it definitely changed something in him, probably in a good way. Like even before the fight, you got the sense that, okay, this is a refocused Johnny Eblen. He was sober about the way it happened. He really was not bitter. He was looking at it in a constructive way, which is the perfect way for a fighter to respond to it. Yeah, maybe you want to have some emotion in there, and I think he probably had some of that too, especially because he didn't get the fight that he frankly deserved. He really ought to have had a rematch. I think that was fair for him to get an immediate rematch, given the length of time that he had been the champion across two promotions that were essentially one, even though it was a new belt, right? He just looks so much more aggressive, though. I mean, not that he's ever really been passive. Pressure is his nickname now. He's had a few nicknames, but he clearly just very motivated differently. And I think this was really, yeah, absolutely something that unlocked maybe a next level of potential for him. I could see him rising, not just to back to the title, to the PFL title, but I think I start to really see somebody who this is his first finish since he'd really first round finish, I should make clear. First round finish since he stepped up in competition back in Bellator 5 years ago. So now we're starting to see somebody who's able to go out there and finish you early. I don't know where Brian Battle is in terms of the real pecking order at 185, but like he looked good enough at 170. He has some skill against UFC level talent. I think there's some way that translate here. So he looked fantastic. And frankly, I would love to see what he can do one day in the UFC whenever he decides that's a thing that he wants to pursue and the UFC agrees.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, what do you think? Did this unlock something in Johnny Eblen that lost to Costello?
It's funny because, you listen to Dustin Poirier, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago, talk on the Joe Rogan podcast in an interview. He's like, Johnny Eblen right now is a top 5 UFC middleweight, like for sure. And when I was listening to that, I was like, huh, that's interesting. Like, UFC middleweight, pretty strong. This past weekend, he looked like he could be, top 2, top 3. I will say Brian Battle looked really out of shape. I don't know if you guys saw his belly. He was jiggling around quite a bit. I don't know exactly what his deal is right now, but
he beat the scale though. Give him that.
He did meet the scale. That is, I guess, a step in the right direction.
It's the fight before the fight. He won that.
Yeah, he won the fight before the fight. I mean, he was fighting like DBX, like the dirty boxing thing that Mike Perry's got going. I don't know what his deal is, but yeah, I'm not too bullish on him after that. Look, Johnny Eblen looked fantastic. He looks like Brian Battles deserved to be in here with me. Like that's honestly the way that it looked. He gets the takedown, immediate takes the back. And that was really sleek, really interesting. Costello Vanstinas also looks awesome against Fabian Edwards. That by elbows, like it's not even like he's submitting or decisions or anything like that. Two really good finishes by two really good fighters. And Scott, I remember you pointed out, a couple weeks ago, he's like, this is a big risk for PFL to not do Eblen versus Costello Vancinis immediately.
It
The
was.
risk pays off. That rematch just got even bigger for the PFL. So that's, a step in the right direction for them. It's interesting though, when they announced, the pre-fight PFL was like, we have the best middleweights in the world. It's like, all right, let's relax. Like, Hamza Chimaev's not here. Like,
Like
I
they
know,
can
like we
say what
want to
they
say that
want. I mean, it doesn't have to
they
be
can say what they
true. It's
want,
not,
but in my head, it
unless
just
there's a way to determine it, they're not necessarily false advertising, right?
I know. I hate it. It makes me not take it seriously.
I know, I get
that's just
it.
my thing. Is like it seems so corny. Like, don't why do you even need to say it if you know it's not true? But regardless, Johnny Eblin, super legit. And Dustin Poirier said he's a top five, and they're obviously the American top team guys in Coconut Creek, Florida. Top five in middleweight, probably. Definitely moving
The
up
only
my
thing I want to
rankings.
add The only thing I want to add, I think before we end up going over to the next thing I think we're about to go to is just the fact that like everybody loses in MMA, right? This was Eblin's first loss. Unless you're again Khabib, everybody's going to lose. And not everybody responds to it the same way that Johnny Eblin did. And I was just so impressed with the way he responded because that shows that hey, listen, if it happens again, don't worry about it. This guy is still young. I think he's what 32, 33. I think he's 32. Not old by any stretch, especially in, the upper weight classes. He could be around a long time, man, and he's got a long time to get better and better and really see where his ceiling is.
Johnny Eblin is 34.
34. Well, all right, fair enough. Fair play to that. But he also doesn't have a ton of cage miles on him. Like he's fought some five rounders, but he's not really been in a ton of wars. And he's only, I think this is what, 17th fight or maybe 18th fight. Pretty low, all things considered.
This is 18th fight. And not for nothing, Eblin with a good wrestling base and improving striking. You are dead right about that. I mean, he has, he's in his prime right now, and he, it's not like he's exiting his prime, that's for sure. I think that was the main point.
He's the right like archetype for MMA, like someone
Yes.
who's got some wrestling, but he's also really figured out how to strike and, probably can handle himself enough if he gets into a bad situation on the ground to at least survive, right?
Yeah, and the grappling that we did see from him was just absolutely vicious. Like look grappling to finish someone, right?
Yes.
But Eric, you were kind of laying out beforehand this whole landscape in the middleweight division. Maybe not the best in the world, right? But I will say, for me personally, this division seems like it's got the most promise, got the most juice going on in there, got the most box office. How does this PFL middleweight title picture look to you, Eric, after these two events?
It looks interesting, man. Like I was always a Fabian Edwards guy. I actually really thought that Fabian Edwards was going to beat Costello Vancinis. The fact that Vancinis gets that win now, this fight, this rematch, it looks way better. Like way, way, way better. And then you just go down the rankings. I mean, it's really not even like that bad. Like Impa Kasaganai, dude. Like Impa Kasaganai was like in the UFC and like kind of middling. I think he's like really improved a lot and has some serious power. Also a bona fide finisher as well. PFL definitely gets a win here. Like this was a major risk for them to make Johnny Eblin versus Brian Battle and then Costello Van Steenis against Fabian Edwards. If either of those two lost those fights, it would have been a disaster. We'd be on here killing them, honestly. We'd be killing PFL right now. But it worked out for them. A gambler's delight. Johnny Eblin, excuse me, versus Costello Van Steenis. It's one of the biggest fights in middleweight in the world right now. Honestly, it might be like the second. I mean, obviously we have Hamzat Chimaev versus Sean Strickland coming up in Newark, but this might be like the second biggest fight in middleweight right now. It's pretty crazy.
What do you think, Scott?
There's an argument to be made for that. I don't know if that's where I would put it, but it's certainly up there, right? And absolutely the gamble paid off. Like that was what it was. And I think we were right to kind of be critical of the plan. I just still don't think it was the right plan. It's just not what you do with this. You have the fight, make the fight. But they leveraged it in a way that actually managed to work out for him, right? And Impic Saganai too, especially the fact that he went out there and I really didn't think he was just going to starch Dalton Rasta. Rasta looked pretty solid throughout the
Yep.
season tournament last year, and obviously, or I guess it was just a tournament, right? Not a season. He looked really good, and I thought he was heading places, and he was fighting at home in front of all his friends and family, and Impa just goes out there and crushes him in like basically 100 seconds or something like that. I will say I think Impa kind of got to the UFC too soon. So I think if he had kind of been a little more patient with his own journey, been able to allow himself to fight on the regional scene a little more, maybe we're already seeing someone who arrived in the UFC and stuck around. That didn't happen. That's not where he went. And now we're seeing him really come of age too. You could absolutely put him against Johnny Eblen in a rematch, whether or not Eblen wins the title from CVS in the next fight, right? Because that fight was a 3-round fight. It was competitive. Give them 5 rounds next time. I would love to see that. I think there's a lot of intrigue there. You still have Fabian Edwards kicking around, right? I think there's things you can do to make this a very, very, very intriguing. Maybe a little further down, we still need to see some of these guys start to establish themselves. But I like the middleweight division of PFL. It's one of their better ones, and it's producing fun fights too, which PFL has not always done a good job of. It speaks to the fact that they're doing this actual traditional MMA format. I think it's making it easier for them to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just it's for me. I haven't always been keeping up with. Oh, I don't think any of us really keep up with the PFL the exact same way that we do with the UFC. Like I think that's fair to say,
No.
right? This middleweight division, it makes me want to pay attention. Like I really want
Yeah.
to see what's going on next with this division. So
I think at the minimum, that's what PFL needs is people wanting to pay attention. I think
yeah.
that's really it. That's like their goal. Pay attention. And this
Mhm.
is worth paying attention to. You're right on.
100%. So let us know your thoughts in the middleweight. Are you as excited for it as we are? But guys, let's talk about what's going on this weekend in the Apex, in the warehouse. Super high stakes fight: Hanato Moicano versus Chris Dutton. No, I'm joking. Hanato Moicano
Don't
versus
be
Chris Duncan.
mean.
Yeah, versus Chris Duncan. Definitely could be a fun fight, but as far as the stakes go, this one certainly does feel like a Apex main event. But what does not
It's
feel like
cardio.
what definitely does have some stakes is what's going on in the co-main event between Virna Jandiroba and Tabitha Ricci. That's a proper top 10 matchup. A lot of stakes going on there, involving the most recent title contender in Virna Jandiroba. And she was talking with MMA Fighting about this trend that we have been seeing in the UFC about the anti-grappling sentiments and I guess the attitude that the UFC has with that. I'll read a little quote from her because this was translated from Portuguese, her native language. I've already noticed that. It's actually a trend in the UFC. I think it's going to become more and more common. It's a real shame because this is MMA, It's MMA, not a kickboxing match. Honestly, I really think it's very sad and absurd. We're moving more and more towards entertainment, and I think we're going to lose a lot of excellence, and that's a real shame. She also joked, there's a balance between being who she is and keeping her job, but if it really comes down to that, she's not going to just turn into a striker. And Scott, I'll throw this over to you. And keep in mind, all three of us have backgrounds in grappling, so it's something that we certainly appreciate. Maybe we have a little bias there. But do you think that she's onto something here, or is she just kind of saying this because she's a grappler and she plays into it? What do you think?
I'm a proud silver medalist at Naga, right over my shoulder, right there. But in the novice division, my only time, or was it beginner, whatever it was. Anyway, man, I think there's always been an impatience with grappling in this sport, right? Like anyone who comes across it, they're like, oh, what's this? This is kind of cool. And then they watch it for a while and maybe they decide, okay, grappling's not really for them. And some people are like, oh, grappling's really for them. I think all three of us made that decision. But I do feel like there's less patience now on the whole, even from the UFC, which is a little bit of a different thing. The UFC kind of, Dana White in particular, would kind of just accept like this is what it is, right? Now we're starting to see sentiments, and I'm not even saying Dana's been explicit about this, but we're seeing sentiments kind of pushing away from grappling in general. And I don't love that. I think the chess match that is mixed martial arts needs to have that. Um, I would be very disappointed if we got to a point where standout grapplers like someone like Jandiroba really feels like they just can't fight to their strengths anymore because it's just not appealing enough. I want them to look to finish fights. That really ought to be the case. You know, we want to see Movsar Evloev actually get it down and really try to get that finish in a way, whether it's with his hands or with his submissions. But you can do that and still not succeed and still be, I think, an exciting grappler. Not enough people have that in them for MMA, but I don't know. I am definitely getting a little disappointed with the anti-grappling push. Are you, Eric?
Yeah, like honestly, like the fans that are booing like grappling and stuff, like that'll never be me. You know what I mean? That's just not like what I do. Now, is there spots where I would like the referees to kind of step in and be like, okay, you guys are at a stalling position here, and we're gonna stand you up? I'm fine with that. But it's there's a happy medium there. Like we've also, I mean, we remember, years ago, and Scott, you'll probably remember this, Jacare Souza, I forget who he was fighting, but he got, oh no, Damian Maia. I believe it was Damian Maia, Jacare Souza. I think Damian Maia had had Jacare's back, and then gets stood up because he wasn't able to, get like a submitting position, and then shortly afterwards loses the fight. It's very frustrating. It's not something that I would like to see really happen. A lot of the booing, and then the referees jumping in maybe a little bit too soon. Now, I'm fine with stand-ups, but I'm not fine if there's, if you're in guard standing up, fine. If you're in half guard standing up, fine. But not like a side control mount, back take situation like that. So again, look, Scott, you grappled, Jake, you've grappled, I grapple. I think we're here. We enjoy grappling. I also like to bet on decisions, and like even like Ryan Glassbeetle tweeted about a friend of mine who works in sports media. He tweeted about it as like a fun way to bet is to bet on fights to go to a decision when you feel like there's a stylistic issue between the two, where it's like I feel like this is going to like cancel each other out. I enjoy doing that. So from my perspective, I like Werner Jandiroba's style. Like, shoot 106 significant strikes against Mackenzie Dern and 9 takedowns. That's activity. You know what I mean? It's five round fight. That's activity. Yeah, I don't want to hear that it's not activity. This is an active fight, and it was a championship fight, and I have no issues with it. I really don't.
That's actually, it's interesting. You both kind of mentioned this. That's something that she mentioned in the interview. By the way, I didn't quote the entire thing there, so go ahead and check it out if you want to see the full context of her comments and all that. But one thing that she did say is she was like, if you want to, make it more about activity with rules or whatnot, she's totally for that, and I think we kind of all are as well. But Scott, you looked like you had something that you wanted to say.
I mean, absolutely. They should shape the rules in a way that forces more action. I mean, it doesn't have to be jujitsu in MMA. It can just be grappling as a part of MMA. But maybe MMA is something that's really supposed to be about the violence. And if you're not bringing the violence, if you're bringing too much of the gentle art, which is not a gentle art, if you're bringing too much of that, maybe that's just not a place for that in this sport. It can be legislated in a way that forces more. We see, look, I watch traditional stick and ball sports. You do too, Eric. They change the rules all the time in the NFL and baseball and basketball because they're trying to shape the sport as entertainment. You can do that through the rules, and they have to some degree, right? The scoring has never been more focused on damage, on doing things to your opponent than it ever has. I mean, 15 years ago, we used to see a lot more lay and pray fights where they would just take them down. And the thinking was you get a takedown, you're on top, you're winning the fight. It doesn't matter what you do on the bottom, you're still on top. And we don't really have that anymore. I don't think a lot of fans even watch the fight thinking that anymore. That seems to have been successfully phased out to some degree. But there's still an impatience, right? If someone like Charles Oliveira, who is the all-time leader in not just submissions in the UFC, but finishes at large, if he can't have a fight where he successfully implements a game plan focused on his strongest asset against his opponent's weakest asset in Max Holloway last month, if he can't do that and not be able to achieve the finish that I'm sure he wanted, but we still can't be tolerant of it, and we get all frustrated with it. It's like, come on, guys. This is a violence king right here. Come on.
Yeah, especially like he was hunting for that. He had the back, and like it's not like he wasn't going to try and choke him out. As long as that's happening, like I'm satisfied. It's like a will he won't he, But we kind of have our backs up against the wall as far as time, as we tend to do. So let's go ahead and move on to some of these other fights. Scott, what is your fight to watch?
Give me Abdul Rahman Yakayev. I want to see what he does against Brenderson Ribeiro as he continues his ascent up the from the prospect pool, hoping one day to join some of those contenders at 205 pounds. I'm curious how this goes.
Eric, what about you?
Ethan Ewing, we remember him from his Malcolm Wellmaker upset win, taking it on 2 days' notice. UFC loved him for that, fighting Rafael Estevan. Rafael Estevan, big win last time against Felipe Bunes as an underdog. He comes in here now against Ethan Ewing, who I think could rise up the rankings here pretty quick. I think it might end up being top 15 at the division, at some point here pretty soon. So I'm pretty bullish on Ethan Ewing.
All right, for me, I've got Azamat Bekoyev versus Tresean Gore, mainly for Bekoyev because he just had a very interesting, I guess
Super.
he popped up on social media after his 2-fight win streak. He had a loss after that, but just very personable on social media, and he's kind of garnered like a huge following all at once. He's got a favorable matchup in my opinion against Tresean Gore, so I could see if he does pass this test, him kind of becoming a new star on social media. We'll see.
Two biggest favorites on the card.
Yeah.
You guys picked.
Well, Scott, what do we have for our event rating?
We're at a 14. This is, it's been very hit or miss on a lot of these fight nights this year, and I think that kind of, I don't know what that speaks to yet. I think it's still too early to tell. This is actually the first time we've been to Apex, and it's not been a particularly solid card, so I'll give them that much. Now they're bringing substandard cards all over the country and making it mixed up. So at least there's that. They don't have to complain about Apex anymore in that way. But we've got way too many deeper prospects on this card than you'd really like to see. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fighters that are outside of the top 200 or later, and 3 of them are outside of the top 350. We're not talking about a very great UFC caliber, if that term even still applies anymore, talent pool here. Not many top fighters. We got 7 out of the top 50 in their weight classes, and there's one top 10 versus top 10. We mentioned it, Genji Dobov against Tabata Ricci, right? But the main event here, I mean, Moicano, he's number 12 in Fight Matrix, going against Chris Duncan, a Scot, at number 39. I don't really love this matchup. It doesn't really say much. Maybe it'll be fun. There's that, but like, and maybe there's something to that, right? But I'm talking about an event rating. The event rating is about the quality of the competition on here, and it is substandard.
I hate the matchmaking even more because Chris Duncan and Renato Moicano are teammates at American Top Team.
That's
they're
true
not like,
too.
they're
Yeah,
not like sparring
it didn't
partners or
feel
anything,
necessary.
Why do that? They
We've
did
seen
that with Michael
play
Venom
out.
Page and Sam Patterson in London. Like, why do we keep doing that? Like, the
We've seen that play
familiarity
out
kind of
weird
ruins
before.
it. Yeah, I don't know why. I don't know why Hunter Campbell keeps doing that, but whatever.
Well, Eric, I know you are passionate about betting, so let's get into your 3 bets in 3 minutes. What do you got for us?
Thank you, Jake. We are back. 3 bets in 3 minutes. Took the last week off, and solid. And then, the week before we went 2-1, still down on the year, but nothing crazy. Almost 50-50. So yeah, we're going to target some of the older cats in this card. Some weird betting lines here. We get started 3 bets in 3 minutes in the warehouse, and here we go. We start on the prelims, and we go. Lando Venata is a -250 favorite in this economy. Lando Venata, not my favorite fighter by any stretch of the imagination. Neither is Darius Flowers. I think this is really just low-level MMA. I don't understand why they're even booked on this card. Lando, we haven't seen him since 2023. He lost 3 of his last 4. I'm not seeing exactly, what the UFC is seeing in terms of booking him, but, from a stylistic standpoint, I think Darius Flowers is, he's not the best, but, plus 200 against Lando Venata, who's, Flowers is 12-8-1. He's come, he's lost his last 3, but, Jake Matthews was a pretty close fight. Prior to that, he won 4 straight. But look, it's really just about the number here. Plus 200 over on seniors. You get Darius Flowers, and I'll take it as my first bet. I just don't understand this booking. It's been so long since we've seen Lando. I have no idea what to expect there, and I'll just go ahead and take the dog outright plus 200. We move on, and we stay on the prelims, and we go to Thomas Peterson versus Guilherme Pat. I think we know what Thomas Peterson is at this point. He's a bigger guy. fighting over at heavyweight. And I think he's, a solid volume striker. When he loses by knockout. When he wins by decision. I think Pat will give him a run for his money here on, the volume striking and like the striking defense and stuff like that. Pat has the reach advantage, and he's also, 265 pound, huge guy. Striking defense is not great on either of these guys, but I just don't think anyone really has the power to knock anyone out. So, 55% strike defense for Thomas Peterson is what I have listed, and Pat was 61%. So I guess that's slightly lean Pat, even though he's the underdog at plus 105. But I'm really targeting this one to go to decision plus 110. Like I said, I don't really see a whole lot of finishing equity from either of these guys. We move on to the main event, which is my favorite bit of the card. I mentioned Chris Duncan is fighting Renato Moicano, ATT, American Top Team, not training partners, but they're on the same team and they have the same coaches. There's definitely some familiarity there. I think this is a massive step up in competition for Chris Duncan. Chris Duncan's a minus 200 favorite, minus 190 depending on the book. I don't really see that. I think Renato Moicano is definitely a live underdog at plus 150. Now, I'm not going to bet him at that number. What I really want is over 1.5 rounds. It's minus 170 over on Bet365. I think that's a steal. Hanato could just jump in there and get guillotined, but Chris Duncan's a pretty, a tough guy, tough as nails, honestly. Remember, he fought Slavikaz on a contender series, lost that fight. Renato Moicano, for all that he is, this is a step up in competition, and he's fought some of the best of the best. So, I think Moicano is a live underdog, but I really like over 1.5 rounds at minus 170. That's your 3 bets in 3 minutes. Let's make some money and get back into the winning ways.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Eric, and I'll throw it over to Scott for quick hits in MMA.
All right, guys. So we've got a busy one here, but I want to start with something that happened over the weekend. It's probably no secret if you were watching the fights, right? Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson will enter the UFC Hall of Fame this summer. Total no-brainer for one of the absolute GOATs of this sport that really throws around that term a lot more often than it should. He is Mount Rushmore level. So congratulations to Mighty Mouse on that one. Sticking with former UFC talent here, Nate Diaz claimed on this past weekend pod that he turned down a fight against Conor McGregor for their trilogy fight to return to the UFC. He was trying to angle for a fight against, he says, Charles do Bronx Oliveira for the BMF belt that he wasn't able to win last time when he fought against Jorge Masvidal years back at the Madison Square Garden 7 years ago. Interesting insight into Nate's motivations before ultimately, of course, signing on to fight Mike Perry in MVP on Netflix next month. Couple of notable fight announcements here, one of which is going to be in our backyard. Joel Alvarez versus Yaroslav Amosov at 170 pounds. That's going on that UFC 328 card in Newark, according to multiple reports. And we've also got Kaya Sakura, who was the one-time UFC flyweight title challenger in his UFC debut, no less. Didn't go his way. He is back up at bantamweight now. He's going to face Cameron Smotherman on a fight night event in Macau, China on May 30th. UFC announcing that one. Some lesser news involving a UFC flyweight, Alibi Adiris. He has been suspended 1 year by CSAD, which is, of course, the agency that the UFC uses for testing banned substances. He had his win over Ode Osborne in February overturned to a no contest by the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, the commission, after popping for a banned diuretic. Other UFC unfortunate news here. We have 3 fighters who have been let go. All 3 of them weighed in last month. Antonio Trocoli and Bruna Brasil. They both lost, whereas Luana Carolina weighed in 8 pounds over the contracted limit and did not compete. She will not be competing in the UFC anymore. That all coming from MMA fighting. Couple more things before we close out here. Ex-PFL season winner Gachi Rabadanov. He is going to compete in the PFL Sioux Falls co-main event against Alex Chizov, on May 2nd. That's per multiple reports here. And then lastly, this happened just this morning. We heard about a report out of Andy Slater of Fox Sports, South Florida. Colby Covington has filed a lawsuit against Jorge Masvidal, seeking damages after Jorge's altercation 4 years ago in Miami. We remember infamously jumping him outside of a steakhouse not long after Jorge had lost his fight to Covington. Covington, by the way, that is the last fight that he has successfully won in the cage, was against Masvidal. That was 5 years ago. or really in the last 5 years, I should say. And apparently he's looking to get a second win over Covington in now in the courtroom, and not just the cage. And that's everything for your quick hits, my guys.
All right, thank you for that, Scott. And guys, let's finally go into the final round. Let's talk about our homework. We had a doubleheader this time: Korean Zombie, 2011 versus Leonard Garcia, and versus Mark Hominick. I had
No, Garcia rematch.
Garcia rematch. That is important to note.
Well, important to note because I actually watched the first one and then earlier today realized that I watched the first one at WEC and had to watch the second one. So I
Oh no,
watched
how terrible! You watched one of the most fun fights ever
They were
again.
so
Oh, that stinks.
fun.
Yeah,
They were so fun.
I mean, Eric, I'll get your thoughts first then, because you watched it the most recently. What did you? I mean, you had to have seen this Twister submission before, being a jiu-jitsu
I
guy.
have. Now, what I thought was most impressive about it was that Korean Zombie doesn't even have him on the ground until 50 seconds left. It's not like he had a long setup here. He really is able to jump from mount to back to Twister within 25 seconds, which is really incredible.
It is.
Leonard Garcia must have been gassed. I know that they were saying that he was training at elevation at the time the commentary was. He must have been gassed.
Never had great gas tank.
Dude, how do you tap to a Twister with 7 seconds left in a round? Like, you can't do that.
It was a heart.
Probably doesn't feel very good. Well, also,
like,
I think what the other thing too is, like, I feel like this submission kind of made the Twister a little bit famous, right? Like, this has got to be the most famous Twister of all time.
It brought it to a new level, right? Because it was Eddie Bravo's, and he's the one who really brought it out there. But I think nobody outside of the grappling community knew what it was until Korean Zombie did it. So that absolutely it brought it to prominence.
So when I think Leonard Garcia's, he's got the Korean Zombie on his back, he's like, this guy's trying to choke me out. He's not thinking about defending a Twister. So I think that's maybe one of the reasons why it came together so quick. And obviously, Korean Zombie's just a phenomenal grappler too.
Mm-hmm. And then of course he follows it up a few months later against Mark Hominick. He goes in there, Hominick goes and whiffs on a giant haymaker and just totally exposed, gets dropped, and he's out. So that fight was over in really like 5 seconds. Like instead of, I think it was 6 or 7 officially, but it was really like 5.
I have to ask, did you watch that live?
I did.
Oh my gosh, what was that like?
It was nuts. It was insane, especially with Korean Zombie. And again, Hominick was coming off of a title shot. He had lost the title shot. And then Zombie, he had actually kind of lost his 2 fights in the WEC. He actually didn't come in with like a lot of momentum in terms of results. But he comes in and then he gets insane results in his first year in the UFC. He's very rapidly in the title picture. It was so wild. And it rewarded somebody who I think just comes to fight every single time, which was really great.
Absolutely. And one final question about this one before we move on. Was this, before the Jorge fight, was this the fastest KO in or finish in UFC history, if you know? It had to have.
I think it tied, I believe it tied Dwayne Bang Ludwig getting the finish as well.
Okay.
But Ludwig's, that was another one where like the timing of it was kind of like wrong or something like that. Officially speaking, if you would have said like a true timer and you put it at the end for when it was officially waved off, that the timer's a little different than when it officially goes down.
Same thing with Masvidal though. Even the Masvidal knockout's really like 4 seconds.
Yeah. But I mean, they all feel the
somebody
same.
somebody should time them right next to each other and do the exact what was like to the millisecond.
Maybe I'll do that.
No, I think that it was. If you take out Masvidal's like little extra punches at the end, it's really like 3 seconds.
Well,
that's your extra homework, Jake. Do that.
I'll let you guys know next week. Alrighty, let us know in the comments what you thought of those. And Scott, let's go on to our next homework assignment. What do we have on the docket?
I have put together a Yuri Prohashka Ryzen Selects playlist for us that you can hopefully share in the comments or in the description, Jake. It is the 2015 Ryzen Heavyweight Grand Prix, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and final featuring Yuri against Satoshi Ishii, Vadim Nemkov, who is of course the heavyweight champion of PFL right now, and Mohammed King Mo Lawal, the former Strikeforce light heavyweight champion. That was a really fantastic run he had there, and I really want to watch that. I've not actually watched it myself, but I'm curious too. And then also I tacked on the rematch with King Mo. So that we're gonna watch all 4 of those.
Very
And
exciting.
are you gonna complain that we're getting more Yuri? I don't think so.
No, just in time for 327. And Scott, for our conclusion of MMA history, what happened this week in MMA?
April 2nd, 2008, 18 years ago, UFC Fight Night 13. We're at like 300 something right now. Kenny Florian against Joe Lozon. It was notable for a few reasons, not necessarily that particular fight, but the one I want to highlight here is that it was the final UFC fight in the career of Dean Thomas, who fell by decision to Josh Neer. And that was the last time we saw him competing. We still see Dean all the time in the UFC, though.
Yes, we do. And for those who need one more fight for all that's going on, what can they look forward to?
I'm giving you LFA 230 on Friday night. It's 9 p.m. Eastern time, main card on Vice TV. There's a heavyweight headliner, but I'll be honest, this is not really my most anticipated non-UFC card of the year. I feel like this weekend there's still some action going around, but not like necessarily the top fighters are going on. Aries in France is something else, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's like Easter weekend and they're just, maybe the regional scene's a little quieter. I don't know.
Fair enough. Something to watch, right? Well, guys, it's been a pleasure as always. Hopefully we enjoy the fights this weekend and you as well at home, and I will see you guys next week.